Welcome back, everyone, to the Explicit Measures podcast with Tommy, Seth, and Mike. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning and a happy Tuesday, gentlemen.
Oh, yeah.
Kicking it off with another week. Here we go. Jumping in. Our main topic for today will be around the documentation that's recently released from Microsoft and the Microsoft team. I think Kurt, again, is also involved in this one. I can see his imagery in here, I think, as well. We're going to talk about the Power BI implementation planning and specifically the content lifecycle management. So I guess it would be an acronym. You could use CLM, content lifecycle management. And let's go through kind of what the article talks about and our opinions or what we've experienced. I think in a real world perspective, I think a lot of the Microsoft documentation is the ideal state of where you'd like to get to. How does this stuff roll out in real life? So that's going to be kind of our main topic for today. So looking forward to going through that article. The link will be down in the description below, and also we'll put the link in the chat window as well. All right, jumping into news. Tommy, what do you got for us today?
So we briefly mentioned the Gartner Magic Quadrant release for the current year. And again, if you've never heard of it, Gartner is an organization that really does deep dives into a lot of industry-specific technology. So business applications, AI, automations, and one of them is the state of the industry for business intelligence and data analytic platforms. They've been coming out with this as long as I've been working in Power BI. And I know since before that. And the biggest things they look at, who's the leader, who's the visionary. So we mentioned that it came out for the current year, but I don't think any of us had really time to dive in. So I wanted to get your guys' opinions now that we have had time to digest the white paper on what stood out. And I have this feeling that we're all going to be in a consensus.
Well, I mean, I really like their approach of going through all these different tools and kind of giving a little quick summary of, what are they doing? What is the most recent kind of developments? What directional things are they going towards? And then they always go through these little sections for each tool, whatever they may be, Tableau, Power BI, Click. It gives you a little section around here are their strengths and here are their weaknesses or their cautions. They call them cautions. And I think it's actually a really good way of approaching seeing all the different tools together. I mean, each tool seems to have, there's always something you can find that's a strength about different tools. So this is kind of an interesting take, and they're adding the new data that's coming out for 2023. So I guess maybe where I was going with that was maybe we should read through the strengths and then the cautions and kind of maybe start there. Tommy, is that what you're thinking?
Yeah. So obviously we're not going to go through all the tools, but just right off the bat with Microsoft, why it stands out. It's this affordability and functionality. It's the ease of integration. And the strong, quote unquote, strong combination of price, functionality, and ecosystem. They did mention Copilot.
Copilot is branded closely with generative AI.
Kind of a weird wording there if you can go connect the dots. And then a Power Portfolio, Power BI, Power Apps, and Power Automate. I'm surprised right off the bat that they didn't talk about the integration with all the other Azure services as one of the bullet points. They're still talking about the Power Platform as one of the main bullet points because they did mention Fabric in the beginning. Now, from the cautions point of view, and this is the one I think we're all going to share some sentiment on. People are struggling with the governing of creating content and publication and going through, especially with the era of Copilot, because there's multiple ways to accomplish most tasks. Azure is the only deployment option, obviously. And really trying to see OneLake be a little more open and the tooling be a little more open. So those are kind of the main pros and main cons for Power BI in this current year.
Yeah, they had a proven interoperability challenge. Microsoft is getting, they recognize that OneLake was definitely a good step in the right direction, but really kind of stepping back and saying, okay, what is actually the appropriate, connection between Microsoft and other tools? How can you blend data from other data sets, Snowflake, I'm thinking, or other systems together with Power BI, and how do they all play together I think some of the other tools kind of do it a little bit better. They're a little bit more open. Databricks is, I think, Seth, you were talking about before we got on the call here. It's got a pretty good, it'll serve data any tool, basically.
Well, I think there's just been a lot of focus over the last few years of serving data, right? And part of serving data, we've realized, especially in larger volumes, is easier if you just open the doors to the access to your systems to some degree. Very controlled, obviously, security, permissions, et cetera, super important. But yeah, I mean that's gonna be an area that you can't pretend you can just create this closed ecosystem where all of these things work seamlessly within your organization, because there's so many use cases where there's a B2C kind of thing. Like I have a customer that needs data and they need access to the volumes, and I'm looking forward for hopefully future kind of movement in that direction. I think whether that's a pain point or a caution in here, probably on some roadmap, I would imagine. Like once they stabilize the ecosystem and get all of the products working together the way the products work independently in Fabric, and that's really where it starts to take off, right? Like you think about it kind of reminds me of analysis services tabular, right? As a separate entity, and we had the conversation all the time, like between, do we just go Power BI? Do we still use analysis services? Do we still, do we use Power BI? Like, and then over time, what happened was, like, at least in my realms, right, all of the innovation, all of the feature development, all of the net new things in tabular analysis services, or the tabular model, semantic model, was done in Power BI. So it pushed you in that direction eventually. And I think that's what Fabric is going to do ultimately, right? Like we're in this state where, yes, these services are options for us to, work with, but ultimately over time, Fabric is probably going to be a place where you get the best stuff. And that's why you want to like dive into that realm. When we get there, I think that's where you start to see some of these challenges or cautions, right? Because Microsoft, very apparent with Gartner, or aware, I should say, not apparent, aware of the cautions, and they're reading the same stuff we are. But yeah. It's currently a challenge from that respect.
I think you're seeing one of the things that sticks out to me in at least specifically around Power BI, and again, I'm looking probably definitely compared to Tableau. Microsoft has a win in the pricing structure. Their pricing structure is advantaged against most other players in that market. You look at Tableau, that's one of their cautions is their pricing structure. They're still pricing it by user. They're still pricing it in a different way. There's not really a conservative effort looking towards the enterprise and figuring out how to allow the enterprise to step in and manage licensing at a larger scale. The other one I've been working with a lot recently is Click, and I have to look them up and look at Click and see what they're doing as well. But that might be another one I could look at and see how they're performing as well. Because it's interesting. I think it's fun to see like their synopsis of these different tools after you've had some experience like working with them and playing with them. You're like, man, that's been really challenging, this tool, or wow, this is really expensive. Like, and then you actually see them writing up like, oh, okay, I am on track here, or I am thinking about the right things, because they're kind of writing up the same experience here. Any other thoughts for Gartner?
It's interesting, the strengths here, because you would think that it would be kind of more the same. And for those who are listening, just because Microsoft obviously owns your Outlook and your calendar doesn't mean by default it's going to be a leader here. It actually did not start off as one. I'm trying to read between the lines, looking at the three strengths, and it's the integration with Dynamics, and it's the Power Platform. And that's kind of telling me that there's really, even with what we're doing with Fabric, there's really no other tooling out there that has that ability to, in a sense, create that in-app experience you can with Power Apps. You either embed it in, or how do you can really kind of touch your data. The original Fabric, which was your integrate with Power Apps, your automate with Power Automate, and analyze with Power BI. And that's still, even now, is showing that no other tool is doing that, or not nearly to the same integration that Microsoft has done.
And maybe there's, I don't know, if they're trying to really specifically review Power BI, Fabric is, technically, Fabric is just more Power BI with other bells and whistles in it. So maybe they're focusing more on just like the Power BI side of things. And that's kind of maybe where some of their comments come from, because I don't see a lot of, to your point, Tommy, there's really not a lot of language here about like Power BI expand. Like I would like to have seen something like Power BI expands into all the Fabric ecosystem and makes much easier all of these other advanced analytical tools. But that might be actually a different section. That actually might be a different, not the analytics and Power BI overview. That may be the, the data engineering side of the world. Like, so they may have categorized Fabric as
Maybe
data engineering
separate it out.
and kind of like broke them out to that's maybe why you don't see the language here specifically for the Fabric elements.
Or rather in the negative.
Well, as individualized things, right? Like, and that is maybe part of the problem of how these products as individual things have been defined and placed in the market, and now it's a challenge because it's an entire ecosystem. I mean, they call it out in the top before strengths and weaknesses that it's part of a broader suite. But if one of the strengths is, it's part of this ecosystem, well, that's also a weakness of all the other tools, right? Yeah. Those are independent services that are not part of an ecosystem. And I think Power BI has in general already had that, right? With, albeit not the options we have in Fabric, and it just becomes more strong. So yeah, I mean, I think they're referencing Fabric, but not completely, right? Yeah. Like Power Platform still. So maybe it's the evolution of when Fabric was available, right? Going GA towards end of year that, we'll start to see more of that interwoven in the next Gartner review. Yeah. The only other two cautions, right, are governance and content creation publication. Like the complaints in there are, no, it's not cookie cutter. Welcome to Microsoft products. There are many different ways to skin the cat, right? Like there are, and it causes confusion. And it creates opportunities for us to talk about many different ways to implement. But I mean, Mike, you even deal with this. I know in your class, you've talked about it on the podcast, where there's so many different ways which you can apply these products, and Microsoft has never really been in the business of this is how you do it, right? You have to do it in this way. They give guidance and tools that like many different ways to do different things, and I think that supports the use case. But you have to invest some time into it. Their third option is kind of just Azure is the only deployment option. There's no IaaS offering. And it's like, yeah, this is the same on-prem cloud conversation. Like if we're there, sorry, it's not a weakness anymore, right? Like we're working in services and platforms in the cloud. This is where stuff is happening. Get there.
Yeah, I think just real quick, the bane of our existence, Mike, I think is going to be that last sentence on that governance of content creation. Because you're right, it's not cookie cutter. And it was so easy to do a Wild West with Power BI semantic models. I'm just looking at that just that paragraph. I'm like, that could easily be 80% of my time trying to manage that, because you're right. It's so easy to create. It's so easy to kind of integrate, but it's very hard to administer. So I think that's one of the real hybrids. I'm looking forward to see that. Hopefully I don't have to use virtual nets as much, looking at the security papers coming from Microsoft, but yeah.
It's also interesting when you look up like keywords that you use in Power BI, like the word semantic model, just looking at those keywords. It's also interesting to see, like you look up OneLake and you see across the different tools, what other tools are kind of hitting in that space or using that same language or verbiage. There wasn't a whole lot of language in the Microsoft, even though there was a big push towards using semantic models for Power BI. There's not a whole lot of language in this around the transition that they talk about models at this point. So they haven't really transitioned over to semantic models, which they might be struggling. Gartner's probably struggling the same way we are. We still call them models, data models.
We're the only ones who call it semantic models.
And maybe semantic models, they're still trying to get used to that new term. But it's also interesting to see like what other companies are talking about the semantic modeling layer, like Google. Scanning through here, SAP has a semantic model language. There's a couple little other honorable mentions. At Scale has this concept of a semantic model. So I think Microsoft also is strategically placing themselves in trying to be thought leaders or leaders in these spaces. And so that's one of the things that I think they're trying to move themselves more towards is some of these other really big, very controlled IT-centric things are using the word semantic models. I think Microsoft's kind of also saying, look, we're playing with you guys too. It's the same space, except we're just making it more easily to click and build your own stuff inside a business user's world.
I think I want to lean into that one point, right? Really hard. If you quickly peruse the other tools within this, not listed in strengths and weaknesses, that is a weakness in a ton of these other ones. It's just this like something missing in their lack of awareness in the market, not resonating in the market, something in the market. Like, so if I'm like, what I can infer here, like Microsoft is the farthest dot to the right and the top. It's the leader. If they've understood something, every system, every tool, every person, right, has strengths and weaknesses, which they're pointing out. Theirs are like within the tool. I think what it shows though is they've nailed the market. They understand like where business intelligence people,
yes,
like the tooling that they need to build successful systems. Are there challenges in there? Yes. But in comparison, like all of these others have like glaring holes or challenges like that run much deeper, I think. And that's what is the strength of Power BI. And I think eventually will be the strength of Fabric.
Interesting. I like that observation a lot.
Seth, it's already at 45 minutes. I only have one more kind of note, and thanks to AI in general, I wanted to take the liberty of taking all the content here and what are the trends that we are going to expect moving forward. So 3 kind of items that Gartner's kind of looking at, and we're looking at for the analytics business platform market. More text-based interfaces. And saying the market is shifting towards generative AI and LLMs for the users to interact with their data, multi-cloud and openness, and then something called composable analytics. The ability for the citizen analyst to easily create some workflow and application to rather than building a model that's going to live forever, but shifting to enrich, contextualize insights that can be easily discarded.
I think Microsoft is, well, anecdotally, like the second two, like the second and third one, I think they're already well ingrained in doing, and they're obviously doing the first one in Copilot. I still think one, like I'm stumbling here. First thought, AI will absolutely change how we do things. I think that being the first thing is still a pipe dream. Like to think about how, not a pipe dream in near term, right? Think about how many conversations we have around data quality, data governance, data being in a position where LLMs or all of these tools can actually produce value. DAX, all of the modeling, all of the connections, like not saying it's not going to be done, right? But like pushing that, maybe it's like a future vision thing where somebody can just be like, yeah, give me the sales for this and show it in a bar chart over, this in our fiscal year. And it will know all of the business logic and everything that we as business intelligence people like know the nitty gritty of. Eventually we'll get there. So maybe it's like the long-term vision, but my gosh, right now it's like, dude, the prep work that's needed to get there. There's a lot. There's a lot.
Seth, remind me to send you an article after this because there's something that
send me an article after this.
Yeah. All right. Cool.
All right.
There's an article reread. Sorry.
Maybe we should move on to the next topic. I do have other thoughts here. There's other thoughts here we can probably move on. We could probably talk about this as the entire episode. Just keep going here, but I think it's worthy for us to move on to other topics here. All right, let's move into our new segment, kind of beat from the street. Any kind of main topics, things that we're doing as consultants or as owners or developers in our companies. What are we doing? What's happening in our worlds, and what are we kind of observing? I'll just throw kind of my beat from the street this week. Kind of observing a lot of need from companies to just kind of get started with their first project with Fabric. It seems like there's a lot of a concerted effort of organizations to say, look, we're close. We know we need to start moving this direction. I also see a lot of interest around DevOps, believe it or not. So with companies getting more comfortable with the whole Power BI Git integration, I think many organizations understand the value of it, but they're a little hesitant to get started with Git, which I find it very interesting. And also, it's more of this, we don't really know how to use Azure DevOps. And after I show them or go through an example, there's a tendency to be like, oh, that wasn't that bad. It wasn't that challenging. So I think there's some more education that Microsoft should do on their side to say it's not that large of a barrier to entry to get into the Azure DevOps and using repos. I think there needs to be some more blogs, or maybe the community needs to pick up with this a bit more and run with this torch a bit more. But I feel like there's a need here for organizations to get started with their Fabric, and they're looking for like those first initial projects where this is a good fit. One thing I will observe, I feel like a lot of the times when I've been doing anything around real-time analytics, it's been quite expensive on the compute units consumption. I've done some very small, I feel like I've done some things that what I would say I'd argue as smaller projects. They haven't been very large, moving lots of files, lots of data. I'm really leaning on this whole idea of micro batching or doing a very small job very quickly, as opposed to having something that's always on and streaming data in. I think a lot of organizations still are asking for real-time streaming. We need real-time data. That'll make everything better. And there's this misalignment with, you realize that's going to cost X much more money because it's always on. You're always trying to have machines run and do things. It might be actually just much better for you to say, let's plan, every hour or every 4 hours, or doing things in a little bit more slower pace that conserves your compute units and not consume so much.
A good way to start that conversation? Like have your slide that's like real time versus batch cost example.
Yeah, right? Exactly.
I can run this thing at X. It's going to be, here's what batch costs you.
Yes.
And to do the same batch or, same thing for the same data loads, real time.
Yep.
5X, whatever it is, it's going to be a multiplier. And
it's going to be some big multiplier.
That is the conversation. Oh, really? That's a lot. What data do we need that fast all the time? Can we do? What if we did like twice a day or 3 or 4 times a day? Yeah, much cheaper.
Oh, much cheaper.
Let's do that. I guarantee that's going to be the conversation.
Yeah, I think that's really important there to note. Go ahead, Tommy.
You're talking about companies are trying to get started with their first project. I'm intrigued. How early is the DevOps part coming in? So if they're saying we want to get started with Fabric, what's the order of operations on average of questions? Is it we need a lakehouse? What's our structure? And then DevOps? I'm assuming it's not that early.
It depends on the organizations. Some are, most of these have already been playing with Fabrics the DevOps portion or conversation is usually around, hey, we've been using Fabric for a little bit. We've got some stuff in deployment. We've already built some things. Can you give me some more details around the PBIP format? How would we use it? How do we turn it on? And it's less about the understanding of, I can turn on a workspace to Git. It's more about, we really like this idea of being able to see all the changes in our files stored somewhere. What the need, I think, turns into is we're just uncomfortable with how to do it inside Azure DevOps. Azure DevOps is something new to them. How do you set it up? What's the team look like? What things do I need to click on? Microsoft kind of really glazes over, I think, a lot of that documentation around what that is. Also, there's this, again, another thing here that I think is going to be relevant when Microsoft comes out with the GitHub side of things, right? So this is also something that needs to be happening in GitHub as well, is how do you, I guess what the question would be is, in these tools, there is a limit of licenses that you can use inside Azure DevOps unless you're going to pay for them. So there's this stakeholder, this basic licensing agreement thing that you can get with Azure DevOps. You have like a certain team of a certain size, you can just add people to it until it hits a certain limit. Then you need to start paying for things. So also, I think a little bit of a licensing question here. Microsoft said, it just works. Yes, it does. If you have a team of 30 people, it's going to be different pricing for you than it would be a team of like 3 people. So there's also some strategy there as well, thinking about how do you do this? Because you want to store all the changes, but I don't want to pay for yet another service. So there's also some other things there that are kind of hidden under the covers that I don't think Microsoft has voiced or had a lot of vocal portion in their blogs or their content yet around that. Anyways, I'm actually really excited for workspaces to get to GitHub because I think GitHub will be a great equalizer. But these are only 2 version control tools. There's a ton of them, other ones. GitLabs, Bitbucket. There's a whole bunch of other tools that are available out there. How are you going to integrate all those? How is it going to work to make all of these tools work in a similar fashion? It seems like they're going to need to expand this fairly quickly.
Start with the most widely used version control platform and go from there, maybe.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, it's one of these, companies make these decisions way before Power BI showed up, right? These are long-standing decisions that companies have made. Oh, we're a GitHub company. Oh, we're a Bitbucket, or we're a Confluence type company, or whatever. They make these decisions very early on, and like you just got to we can't use that because it's just not part of our ecosystem.
But there is some validity to that, right? Like when you centralize, especially around like data documentation, like if you've got years of information in Confluence, right? Like it's hard to rip out and go to some other platform just because somebody wants to use it. And then the challenge, and this is the proliferation of third-party apps within businesses that is crippling or can be, is if you have too many of those, you start to silo information into different parts of the organization, and it becomes very hard to kind of cohesively pull things together. So there's pros and cons to both, right? Like, I get it.
Yeah. Anyways, interesting things on there as well. So those are my initial impressions. I think there's a lot of companies kind of interested in it. I think people are trying to get their feet wet. Microsoft is touting this whole real-time analytics. I'm not sure people are ready to spend the money on it yet at this point. And I don't think there's a lot of people blogging about the scale and the options here, right? There's an option of doing microbatching. There's an option of doing real-time. What's really the cost difference? Are we talking a 10x cost difference? Is it always a 5x? Like, I think there needs to be some more people trying out patterns and figuring out, okay, what's the right speed here? But I'll always argue real time is going to cost more, period.
I'm curious how much that demand for real time is, because if I'm getting an organization that really wants to begin to put Fabric into production, we start with Lakehouse. We start with one lake.
Yes.
I think the real time, even the DevOps too, if you have a team that does not have the knowledge there, you start with integrating your data into a one lake, because it's very easy to go back. So I would be amazed, at least on your end, if those questions are like, I know we want to get started, but we like to get Copilot set up, and when's GitHub going to be ready? Also, we love the real-time event hub. I feel like that's really missing the train, or missing the kind of the foundation there.
I don't think people are actually asking for those features. Honestly, no one's asking anything about Copilot. No one's asking how to get it. No one's asking to get into it. It just seems to be like, okay, yeah, it exists. It's there. I think really more along the ideas, we're talking about BI teams. So maybe the trend here is we're talking about business intelligent teams that are coming from tools where there is not this Git integration. It's not there, right? So we're talking about users that are in the business that are potentially building things for their department. They're used to using Excel and SharePoint. That's what they're used to doing. If you version control things, it's a SharePoint. And even still, it's kind of like SharePoint Online is kind of a bit newer as well. Like people are just storing files or versioning things with numbers on files and sometimes as well. So there's also this growth as well happening that, okay, we're going to move away from the SharePoint experience. We're going to build models and thin reports, and we're going to store those inside Git. And I think there's a very low friction path here around, you can just turn on the Git. You can just turn it on, link it to a repo, and just let it synchronize, just make it part of your pattern. So I think there is even with the integration that they've got now, there's a low-hanging fruit option, and then there's a more elaborate experience, right? Do you just need copies of things that are in the workspace so that way if someone screws up, you can roll back? Okay, there's an easy way to get there, and you just kind of let the system run by itself, and you're not doing a whole lot of like reviews. Then there's another system where it's a lot more elaborate, where I'm cutting branches, I'm using different things. And I actually think that kind of gets a little bit into today, right? So that whole idea of using these more elaborate versioning tools really, I think, plays a lot with this lifecycle management piece, because there's going to be a bigger team. Like when you talk about bigger teams, they're going to need better tools, more control.
Bigger, better, faster.
Bigger, better, faster. All right. With that, I think it's a good transition to our actually main topic today. Let's go into our main topic. The main topic today is we're going to be talking about the content cycle life management. We're doing the content life cycle management overview. I'll put that in the chat window as well. Here's our topic for today. Tom, you want to give us a quick overview of the lifecycle management tool? There's a great infographic that's there today. That's going to make it to the thumbnail for sure.
You know what I used to do with these thumbnails and diagrams? I used to print them out and put them on my wall. I feel like I need to get to this again, because some of these are great, man. So what we are beginning today, what we are starting today, if you remember, we did, I believe, last year in Q4, we really went through the implementation planning, implementation Tuesdays. Well, turns out that Microsoft's been working feverishly, and now is an entire subsection, I believe, 8 to 9 different articles that we're going to dive into every other Tuesday. Yeah, every other Tuesday, we're going to be doing our CLM overview or series. So this is part 1, just the overview. And really what it's talking about is finally, what is content lifecycle management if you were never a developer? What does it mean for Fabric content, artifacts? What does it mean to build, deliver, update, and then retire in the world of Power BI? What are the best practices? How do you actually validate your data? How do you actually deploy it efficiently? And then going through and monitoring and finally retiring it. So there's a lot of overlap between what we do, and especially if you're CLM, especially with software or web developers. And usually there's never been something dedicated just for the business intelligence pro. And I think I'm loving that there's all these articles out here, and especially where we are with Fabric, to go through what does it really look like?
Yeah, I think many organizations are not really paying attention to this. I think there's a lot here that are not. I think everyone's very good at developing, maybe some validation, definitely good about getting the content out there, deploying things, but no one's monitoring it. No one's retiring it. Those are things I think that are just purely missing, I feel like. Anyways, I'll kind of jump in there. I love the little hexagon diagram. This is really good. I actually have a talk that I've been doing well before this one. It was very similar to this, about how to refine or make your existing content, right? Get requirements, just get something out there, go back, review, and then kind of repeat the cycle again. That's kind of how it goes. It's going to be this evolution. All right, thoughts. Seth's got a lot of thoughts. I can see it already.
No, I want to lean into like what. Okay, so if we're going to talk about this for 6 or 8 episodes, Mike, tooling aside,
I feel like I'm getting in trouble right now.
Tooling aside, what state you outlined some of the stages, like how many organizations that you engage with, like have a rockin' content lifecycle management process? Because ultimately it's a process.
That's a great question.
Versus not. It can be a percentage.
Let me. I'm gonna maybe answer your question. Maybe I'm taking it off the rails here as well. If I look at what organizations are good at doing, they have a really good process, or most have processes around getting requirements, so plan and design. They have really good around development, right? We're going to get the requirements, we're going to hand it off to so-and-so, and they're going to create the ticket, get the report started, and then they will deploy the content. Things that I see that are weaker, to your point, Seth, like where do I see organizations doing well? They do well in those stage 1, stage 2, and stage 4. Those seem to be very solid. We understand how to make that work. Where things, and this might be just part of the function of Microsoft's tooling, again, back to the Gartner conversation earlier, right? It's not as easy to validate content. It's not as easy to monitor how long it's been running or who's using it. It's also not easy to retire it and kick it out of the system. So I think a lot of what I address in the class around, deployment and governance pieces is, okay, how do we address, like, what do we do? Not all content is created equal. Some content can just get whipped out the door and sent. Other content needs to be validated heavily, and you lose trust if you don't validate stuff. And then how do you maintain and support it? Who's actually using it? Should we be killing this stuff? I think there's a lot of other cycles here. And when I look at this chart or this graph, this is about Power BI content life cycles. This is not just the report. I'm looking at this in a lens of, hey, there's semantic models. How do you this is the same process you would use for the semantic model. This is the same process you would use for your lakehouse or your one lake. Like, there's a lot of other artifacts here that I think are need to be considered. And I think many organizations are only focusing on the reports. It's just the reports, or maybe the app if we're lucky. And there's a lot of other things here that we should figure out how this fits into our lifecycle management for tables and lakehouses, for example.
Yeah.
And this is the big part, I think, of that I'm really excited to go through this series. Back in the day, Microsoft actually had a adoption PDF or white paper that was only available to download. I think the last time they actually updated that was like 2017. And that was all about that planning and adoption for your organization. And obviously at that time, it was just the model and the report. That's what we were building. But to your point, Mike, I see the same thing where people or teams are great on the gathering requirements.
Totally.
There's no universal tooling in terms of how they actually gather the requirements and how they go through it. Some people do Word documents, some use Confluence, some have some archaic system, but they at least are all attempting something around there. But yeah, once it's published, and then also trying to see, does something like this already exist in the environment? How do we actually validate because of X, Y, and Z? That's really where a lot of teams are struggling. But let's focus on where we're going, at least for our series, because now the questions are ever expanding. Because rather than who's asking for, what report are you trying to create, it's what are you trying to do? And that's going to lead down a different product. Is it going to be a lake house, or is it going to be a semantic model?
Is it a different topic, though, I think. I mean, I like where you're going. Like, what are you trying to do is the bigger question around some of this.
Head a little, yeah.
But when I look at the Power BI content lifecycle, that's not addressed in that circle of things that were like. You're right. The what should we be doing should be informing a lot of this content creation to do this. But like once we've kind of defined it, I feel like I think what you're talking to is like a higher level. And this, again, as I look at the Power BI content lifecycle,
slightly reading ahead, yeah.
You might be reading ahead a little bit and like where you want to be going. Because agree with you, right? If you're doing things that are not broadly aligning with the company's goals or objectives, then again, it's back to our very simple distillation of like what you're doing, right? If this thing isn't making you money or saving you money, why are we doing it?
Yeah. I think the only reason that I wanted to lean in a little bit before we dive into all these stages,
okay, sure,
tooling or different ways is, I think I resonate with you, Mike, in that the stages that you outline are probably the ones I'm going to talk about more because like validation, who validates? And this is
how do you validate? Like, what's your pattern?
The initial, like who's responsible, right? Like because these requests come from so many different places or people. Do you have a team that validates data? Like, does the person validating the data understand how to validate the data? Are they doing that just in small microcosms of like, hey, I'm going to check this account. I'm going to check this product. I'm going to check this, whatever, and not check the other 98% of what was created, right? So I think that's a real problem to solve or talk about, in organizations. Monitoring to me is the data still valid? These are live systems, right? Data pumps in all the time. And what does that speak to? Quality and governance, right? So like long term, and then retiring is almost kind of are we wasting money or potentially creating confusion because we have so much stuff in the system? And that one I love to talk about because if you always look at your systems, like we have to onboard somebody new tomorrow. How do you teach them about the latest? Like what have you done? What does the system look like, et cetera? And when you look at it through that lens, oh my gosh, there's so much. You're just like, I'm going to delete it. Delete, remove, offline, right? And when it's part of your cycle, you wouldn't have that problem. So
I would agree with that one.
I'm intrigued, and if you want to take it somewhere else, let me know. But I think one of the big things I'm asking myself as we begin this new journey is, what does CLM or the lifecycle management look? Obviously, we know when we talk about a centralized team, but what does that look like, especially when you go back to the Gartner issue, or where it's the self-service, the ability to create, the inability to govern? So I wrote down CLM versus self-service versus governance. And I'm thinking about this right now in terms of, obviously, we're going to plan. The BI pros, they're going to plan. They're going to follow this more or less to a T. Is this something that we should be pushing and encouraging for the self-service citizen development? And then I think kind of the last part of that triangle is, how much is CLM integrated with the governance program?
So I like where you're going this, Tommy. And I think, if we're on the overview page and we're going down to the approaches to managing the content, I definitely think there's, in this self-service area, I definitely think I'm focusing on, it's simpler for people to manage. You don't want to overburden, and this is where I feel like a lot of conversation happens. I don't want to overburden the team that's generating reports, analytics, tables of data, pipelines, like I don't want to overburden them with process so that we can't get anything ever done. When I'm in a team that has only one or two key responsible people for doing analytics, I find that those organizations, what they've done is, there is a couple people that are really sharp. They're the ones in charge of doing the analytics, and everyone else in the company they're busy with other things, and they just need to be able to consume data quickly from that team. And so in those smaller departments where you have less people, you don't need a lot of rigor. You don't need Git. You don't need all these automated things unless you really want to spend some time learning how they work and to best incorporate them in your business process. So I really like their second image in the article, talking about the approaches to lifecycle management. I think this is really good, right? Step one, here's designing. What does that look like? And I'm not sure why they have collaborate in teams as step one, design and create content. I mean, I get it, but maybe they're talking about just having conversations in teams, or maybe it's a planner that's in teams or something like that. I'm not sure. It doesn't, I have to read up a little bit more on that one. I don't really quite understand why they're talking about collaborating teams at that first level there. But as you move down, right, it's a lot of like, okay, store your files in OneDrive, create everything from desktop. I mean, desktop and OneDrive seems to be like your jam if you're a smaller team that's doing self-service. When you move into the enterprise team, this is where we provide a lot more automation. And I think in a small company, you're going to have a lot of self-service type design. As you expand your scope of your project or expand into larger organizations, you're going to have a lot more of the enterprise solutions in addition to the self-service. So I don't think of this as a one or the other. I think of this as, there's going to be a lot of content that is going to be self-service already across the large enterprise organization. You want to design for that, but also you need to be able to plan for, there will be some strategic data sets. There's strategic teams that are going to develop data, and you want them to share their data across the organization. That's where the enterprise stuff needs to kind of come into play. And I think that's where it makes a lot of sense to me.
You know what doesn't make sense to me? Like Microsoft Teams. Like if I'm planning and designing content,
I agree.
Like that
I would have put Excel there.
I don't want to like the challenge with that in the regard of what is the outcome of plan and design? That is the thing, right? That everybody wants to go back and talk to or speak to. So that is like, this is designed or geared towards the developer, but at the same time, how are we communicating, right? Like, where's the standard requirements for the thing we built? And I don't want to read that through chat messages. Like that should just be
that's a poor way of managing that.
The outcome of maybe a lot of the conversation in Teams, right? But the outcome of that is something I should be able to go reference, because at the end of the day, when I don't do validation and I don't clean up after myself and I've deployed something that, is wrong, right? Or the business didn't ask for, where do you go reference? Right. Like, so I don't know. I get it. Yes, it's great to communicate across teams with Microsoft Teams, but in my mind, like, unless that's the links to, where my file is, or where our, standard document, or if we're keeping it in Microsoft realm and in the self-service, like, where's my PowerPoint slide that says, here's the requirements, here's what it looks like, it's an odd one.
Well, that's only because they don't have a product that compares with Jira and Confluence.
I mean, they have Planner. I mean, I would have easily said Teams and Planner. Like, you can get that verbatim. If you're in Teams, you can add the little, it's a SharePoint list that's, backlog, to do, and done, right? You have a very simple backlogging item. I think, and honestly, I've used that a number of times. There's, Monday tools have used this, to your point, Tommy, Jira, or some kind of other tools. By the way, I've been using Azure DevOps religiously as my tool tracking for work and work items. Dude, Jira is way better. I'm holy cow. I've been so hard. I'm thinking, like, it's got to work. It's got to be a tool that I can use, and I got to be able to manage and plan content. But boy, Jira has been so much more easy to use and so much less friction to get tasks in and describe what you're trying to do. It's been crazy how much easier it is to organize things inside Jira. Anyways, Microsoft, do better.
Yeah, regardless, I think it's, maybe it's a shared simple thing, or maybe it's not. I don't know how that wouldn't fall into self-service, but
I think there
needs to be a byproduct of something.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree.
The bigger item we're talking about is those are the extremes of the extremes for the very first step. Either we're chatting in Teams, or to your point, Mike, we are full dive into development with DevOps. And there's got to be something in between called the BI pros. I'm not a citizen developer. I'm not a full-on developer. So where do I start? And I think that's what we're going to see a lot of in this documentation. I'm not necessarily reading ahead, but with all the different items and artifacts, is there's going to be this middle ground, because do we cater to the extremes if we're, very early on for all citizen dev, or do we go dive into best practices from a development point of view?
That's a good point, because I think you're speaking to Tommy. Like, what's the point, and like, where's the edge and the cliff that I need to say, okay, I'm done with using Teams, I'm done with using SharePoint or OneDrive, and I really do need, like, where is that threshold where I really do need to go into, we're ready to start doing Azure repos, or we're ready to really start doing Azure test plans. And this is another thing I'm also going to be very leery of. In the section called validate content, it's manual testing in Power BI. Then there's Azure test plans. What on earth Azure test plans are people doing to run this in a deployment pipeline using Azure repo? Like, who's doing this? The only person I'm aware of doing this is John Kursky in his blog around how to build tests around things. So there's no easy tools or solutions that I have seen that have been developed yet. I think this is actually an opportunity. Here's your $1 million idea, the world. Build that.
I don't even want that. Don't even build it. Mike, don't waste the time.
But you talking about opportunities, right? One of the Gartner confusion around stuff.
Yes.
What do end users who are using Fabric and Power BI do? They come to the documentation here, they see a graph like this, and they're like, I want to be an enterprise scenario.
Yes.
Here's what I'm being told to go use. I'm going to go look up who's built this before. And you know what they're going to find?
Who's egg?
Nothing.
Crickets.
So how does that reinforce the strategy here of, here, go use our products. Here's how it's done. Here's an enterprise solution. And then there's no process they can follow. I think that closing that gap, I think, is really important for removing that as a concern.
I'm going to literally,
I just wanted to lean in there because of what you were saying and how you were saying that.
Yeah.
Brought forward that thought.
I'm literally going to be Googling, how do you Azure DevOps test plan for Power BI? and looking to see if there's any arguments for and is there any articles from Microsoft that's talking about this one? I don't think there's no articles. There's nothing. So like, I mean, even if
you're reading about it right now and not implementing, I would assume not many people are using it.
If anything, it should be more accessible because we actually have file formats now that are actually made for Git or are made for repos. So that's the one change. But no, I agree. And this has been the constant struggle too, where Mike, I think you and Steve, you built a Power App. We built an app internally at my old organization.
Mm-hmm.
We used check-ins and checkouts with SharePoint.
Yep. Correct.
To kind of catalog everything using the
SharePoint's actually pretty robust from a check-in checkout standpoint.
Really not, yeah.
Yeah.
And like, so there's definitely been things that we've implemented, but again, not necessarily all universal. And more importantly, they're not all perfect. And again, not necessarily we're always going for perfect here, but like the validating content is such a headache. But I think just for us, when it comes to like, what is the best way from start to finish to work and create, manage, and validate a artifact in Power BI? That's integrated, right? Because I can do the whole thing with APIs and the activity tracker and all that and create a model. But again, it's still very convoluted, right? And I think this is the big part here where the other side of the coin, since we're more business facing, I think, than your normal developers, whatever platform or I guess whatever process that you put in place, there does need to have visibility in your either the governing council or stakeholders. So you're not just using some heavy dev product, because at some point your stakeholder, your chief sponsor is going to want to see what's going on. So there needs to be insight in that too, which is something that really does need to be taken accounted for.
Yeah, and I guess where I'm going here on some of this stuff is like, and this is where I was saying earlier, a lot of the Microsoft documentation is kind of like this ideal state. You have unlimited time, you have unlimited people, you have unlimited resources. Like some of this is looking like at a very big picture. Like there's no automation around automated test plans. It's not something. It's something we should be doing. This to me, again, maybe I'm reading between the lines here a bit too much. This is where Copilot should be placed. This is where this is where models should be like, why can't I send a report through an AI model and say, here's the link of my report. Just what changes occurred, even visually on the page. Like this is where I think stuff should be simplified, and you should be able to run, like think of like what AI is good at. It's good at doing these like very minutia detail things. It should be able to interrogate the file. It should say, I should be able to send a PBIX file into, or even like a model potentially into a large language model and say, tell me what changed. Or anything, is there anything drastically different here? And it should be able to go through that model and either provide a bunch of summary tables, figure out what changed between version 1, version 2, because it should be very consistent depending on the deployments, and its expectations of what it comes back to you should be very similar to what you actually changed, right? I mean, this is, I think, a really good opportunity and this is one of these things like, adding descriptions to your columns, adding descriptions to your measures. This is all stuff that we know we need to do, but we just don't have time to do all this stuff. This is where the large language models and AI should be producing the help. Get rid of this work for me and make my work better.
That's a really good point, especially with like the monitoring and validation and stuff.
Yeah. Why can't I just shove an image in and say, here's image 1. I built it yesterday. Here's what image 1 is. I made a change. Here's image 2. Boom.
Even from a data perspective, hey, LLM, have you noticed any significant changes in the data structure from like yesterday to today?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, there's all this data is missing, or like it was this form and now it's this.
Yeah, you had 3 years of data, now 2 years of data. Is that what you wanted to do?
Summarize format. Mm-hmm.
Summarize this data for me. Oh, here's the total sales by year, or here's the total sales by month and year. Cool. Oh, I can see. Look, I see how the numbers are different now. Like to me, that's where AI should be like doing its work. That's a lot of low hanging fruit, and then I think that from a developer standpoint adds a lot of confidence. Oh, I actually do know what I'm doing, or yeah, I did make this change and this is what I was expecting from the change. I think a lot of this is helping you get to that point, because you can make changes to models, but that may drastically impact the change on the report. Changing a simple measure somewhere in the report could have wide implications. Another one, Seth, that would be really good here as well. AI should be smart enough to say, and maybe this is just a lookup thing. And again, Alex Powers always yells at me for this. He goes, "Why are you always trying to use like Copilot as like a lookup, a fancy search tool?" But there's this concept of, show me where this measure is used across everything I own, and it should be able to scan. It should be able to have access to all the information, right? All the analyzing Excels that have been running, the queries have been there, all the other reports, all the other semantic models, and large language models or AI should give you that, hey, here are 10 calculations that all basically mean the same thing, but they have different words for what they describe them. Like, this is, to your point, Tommy, a long time ago, is how do we understand the data catalog of what we're building?
Man.
AI could really help with that, I think. AI recommended me common measures that I should be using across my environment. And it should scan all the models and say, oh, here's a data set. This data set's reused this many times. Oh, here's the measures that are being used by the thin reports and the regular report. Here's what people are doing with it. It should be able to from the queries, be able to produce to you, this is the most interesting or populous information about your whole system. And maybe that's just super advanced search. I don't know. Thoughts?
I agree with you.
Tommy, what about you?
Dude, you just made me think of a hot take.
Tommy's hot take.
Of the things that Tommy likes to do, he likes to put AI on his computer, which basically trashes his computer. So that's one thing that Tommy loves to do. So
it doesn't cost anything, that's for sure.
The fact that I'm pandering to your area is probably like a good thing. Sorry.
No, to Seth's earlier point, there's a lot of setup that's going to need to be done before that just works. But all right, let's kind of go back to the hot take. And there's one of two ways I was going to go with this, around a little more governance. But let's see if I can get Seth off the one rating.
Yep.
So
just
again,
put the word "not" in front of it. Remember,
that's what I actually changed it. So I actually already crossed it out. So here's the hot take.
All right, Tommy's hot take.
You are a large organization or a team of business intelligence professionals at an organization. Because we've never had a product already that just works with Power BI CLM. You do not need at all any Git or version control system that a developer uses if you are an enterprise organization or even a mid-sized organization using Power BI. It is unnecessary.
So I have to agree or not agree with their statement.
1 to 7.
So 7 would be agreeing that you don't need it.
You do not. Yes, exactly. This is what happens when I do not put the "not" in front. By the way,
He's trying to reverse.
You just want my number on the other
side. He wants his number to be higher.
No. So
talk about manipulating the numbers. Tommy's doing it right here, right now.
You make these declarative black and white statements.
Take.
Okay, 7.
Okay, so you definitely do not need it. Completely agree with
me. Do you need it to deliver a product or deliver something to the business? No. Is it the best product? Are you going to have issues? Are there going to be potential problems that like manual work and manual checking and all of that kind of stuff is going to create headaches and more work and more burden for the organization? Yeah. That's why those tools exist, so that you don't incur all of that. But can you deliver something without it? Yeah. What do you think self-service is?
I'm going to err on the side of, I'm probably going to give it a 6. I'm with Seth. I think it's something you very strongly, you don't need to. There's a lot of organizations that are very large that are doing this without a ton of automation. However, if you see yourself becoming a large organization, I'd be willing to bet. Let me step back here. Automation is your friend. I'll just say that. That's the main key point here. And a lot of what Power BI does is it automates getting data together, shaping it into a model, and regularly reloading that data over and over and over again. That's the value of Power BI. As we get to larger enterprise solutions, the ability to automate more of that process through developing, validating, deploying, that becomes more important.
Eroding quality, validation, all of those
All
things.
that, all the quality of your product goes up when you start automating more. So can you deliver something without it? Yes. Should you? If you get to that scale, should you continue to stay in that? You're just going to throw more people and bodies at problems. So your analytics team will grow. And I think that's not what we're trying to do. We're not trying to throw in a new tool to grow our analytics team larger. We're trying to do more with less people. This is common across every department, honestly, right? I mean, this is...
Yeah. If you would rephrase the question, say, would you recommend that a business, not engage in lifecycle management or some of these tools even when they start their Power BI journey? Like, where would you fall on the spectrum? Like, obviously you're going to get it better, like a more nuanced standard, because what we're outlining is, can you throw stuff out there? Yes. Are you going to pay a price in the future? Absolutely. Is that price larger the more it just explodes and people are doing whatever they want? Yeah, it's a giant mess at the end of that tunnel if you have no quality checks, no validation, no nothing. And then, like, is the organization in a very worse spot down the road? Probably, because you're going to lose trust in your data. And when you do that, then you might as well just scrap it and start over.
Well, I think to your guys' point, we don't really even have an out-of-the-box automation tooling. The only thing we have is deployment pipelines and APIs and PowerShell.
I mean, but this outlines there are methodologies and different tools to do the different things. You don't got to go straight to Git. You don't got to go straight to DevOps, right? It's the process that's important. My final thought is this. I'm kind of hung up on the trap, right? If you guys think about when you show a slide in a presentation of numbers, regardless of how you put it together, it becomes what people believe or think, right?
That's true.
Until it doesn't. And I think slides do I think documentation does the same thing. So while a lot of the Microsoft technical documentation this is just a way to do something. This is an example. The trap here is you're not understanding your audience. I don't think. If you want to build your ideal state, that's what you should do in this documentation, because a lot of people are coming to this without the knowledge, and they're going to read, I want to be advanced. I need to do enterprise. This is the way Microsoft is recommending I go do that. I should absolutely have a reference blog or a process or a way to implement what you're recommending in this documentation, or give me a link to your rep that I can call so they can show me how it's built, because this is how people are going to go build it. Is it the only way? No, it's not. If people are familiar with Microsoft systems or want to use third-party things, they can, they will. But how many people come to this stuff and go, this is what Microsoft is telling me to do. I don't know how to do it. Hey, Microsoft, show me how to do it. There's no place I can go. What's my next step? What's my action, right? And if I was going to say anything, don't just throw content out there. People want to see these slides. They're believing that the advanced enterprise way to do this is using these tools. Show them how to do it. Like, it's a simple path to actually like selling these products and engaging customers in the way that you want them to, but you're not leveraging it the way you should. So I will try to back out of some of these as we go through to like not be so critical, because I think there's a real opportunity there. But we'll talk about the nuance. And overall, I think this is a valuable conversation to outline for folks where, there may be challenges in just the process, not the tooling. And I think both of those things will go along as we talk about this more.
Man, there's some good stuff coming up. I'm looking ahead here a little bit. I'm looking at validating content. Man, there's some good talking points. We're gonna hit it hard here on a couple of these talking points, because you're firing on all cylinders, Seth. I really like your comment there, because I think this bodes very well for the next couple of things we're coming up to. There are certain areas of this process that are robust and defined. There are certain areas that are not quite there yet, and you'll see it in the documentation as it shows up later on. So awesome, like it. Thank you very much for your time. This has been a really good episode. Lots of discussion. Frankly, it took a lot more time than I thought it was going to be. So thank you for sticking around with us for this whole time. We appreciate your ears and your listening for this hour of time with us. Our only request is, if you like this content, if you found this was valuable, and if you're interested in learning more about the content and lifecycle management, stick with us for the next couple series. and then episodes on Tuesdays. We're going to do some more of these every so often here. So stay tuned. More is coming. And with that, Tommy, where else can you find the podcast?
You can find us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. Make sure to subscribe and leave a rating. It helps us out a ton. If you have a question, an idea, or a topic that you want us to talk about in a future episode, head over to powerbi.tips/podcast. Leave your name and a great question. Join us live every Tuesday and Thursday, 7:30 a.m., and join the conversation on all powerbi.tips social media channels.
Excellent. Thank you all very much, and we'll see you next time.